In Idle Heroes, the goal to building the perfect account progressively changes as you develop. However, the principles across the entire game remain the same. Whenever you go check out a guide that talks about building a good team, no doubt you've heard that we want to be running one hero as our main damage dealer. The reason this is the case is thanks to the Celestial Island. In here, we can place our heroes where they will live in a house and they will have tenants that will give them bonus stats. And if you advance your account enough, these stats can be in the millions. But if your account is relatively underdeveloped, you'll probably be using a hero such as Eloise. In previous videos, I've explained why Eloise is such a good hero early on, and the main reason is because she has lots of sustain and can keep herself alive whilst punishing opponents for hitting her, because every time she blocks, she counterattacks. Also, she has excellent tenants. She has Carry, who can steal energy from opponents, and Tix, who is able to steal attack, have control, and has good burst damage as well. Between the three of these heroes then, you can pretty much cover most things in the early game, and by building some additional 9 stars such as Ignis and Waldeck, you can pretty much cover any weakness your Eloise may have. However, once you've gone ahead and got to a stage in the game where you can do the Glory Challenge, things get a little bit different. Once you unlock Void Campaign, which requires you to have got to level 130 and have a Transcendence hero of Void 4 on your account, assuming you've beaten the first stages of campaign, you will then gain access to something called the Tree of Origin, where you can take a Void 4 hero further than the imprint levels. Initially, you'll want to get a hero to Tree of Origin 3, and this will get you some additional Spiritual Essence and Stellar Shards. You can then undo that hero and build a hero from a different faction. So you can see here in this first area, it can be a Shadow or Abyss hero, then we'll need a Fortress or Forest hero, and then you can undo them and instead build a Dark or Light hero. That will give you a total of 600,000 additional Spiritual Essence, which given what you already need for Tree of Origin 3, is enough to take you to Tree of Origin 5. Then, when you reach 1.25 million Spiritual Essence in total, you will access not just Tree of Origin 5, but Tree of Origin 5 level 120. From there, you will unlock the lower part of the Glory Challenge, and that gives you an additional 350,000 Spiritual Essence. So if you've been smart and saved your soul symbols, you can then go ahead and develop your account past having Eloise and whatever other Transcendence heroes you may have, and instead build a Tree of Origin 5 hero in each faction, getting you access to over 2 million Spiritual Essence on top of the 1.25 million you already had. This is enough to begin investing in your team. Now, at this stage in the game, you should have access to at least 2 Transcendence heroes, and when developing your account, you want to move away from someone like Eloise. However, the principles of Eloise's strengths, such as sustain and counter damage, stop being useful at this point. The reason this is the case is because opponents have much more damage at these later stages in the game, and also you're not able to use non-Transcendence heroes, so any hero from Shadow, Fortress, Abyss, Forest, Dark or Light are not able to be used in the Void Campaign. And the Void Campaign and making progress in this area is really, really important because it will give you passive resource gain and also unlock Void Invasion bosses, which will get you even more resources when you can go ahead and fight these. Therefore, a sustained strategy focused around getting your heroes hit is not going to work because you don't have a full team you can send in at this point. You probably have only 2 Transcendence heroes and they will take way too much pressure from the opponent and they will simply die. So the strategy we need to aim for now is called Burst. This is where you build a hero who can deal a lot of damage extremely quickly. And by focusing on them in the Celestial Island and building their tenants, you can increase their attack stat as high as possible, whilst also increasing stats like crit damage, holy damage, skill damage, all to improve the damage output of your hero. At this point, it is probably worth mentioning that your hero will have a cap of 150% crit damage. This is really important. Heroes will be able to be given crit damage from things such as their imprints, so if you're lacking some, you can always switch in and add a crit damage imprint here. As well, you can get a crit attack stone, which also gives crit damage. I don't have this currently on my Lord of Fear Aspen because I gain crit damage from other places, but early on, stones and imprints are the easiest ways to gain crit damage on your heroes. Not to mention that when it comes to monsters, you should hopefully have Phoenix, and Phoenix offers you 20% additional crit damage as well. So make sure you're aware of whether your hero has reached the 150% crit damage or not, as this will allow them to do as much burst damage as possible. As well, when it comes to choosing the enables on your heroes, a lot of people will opt for Unbending Will, as this stops you from taking fatal damage and gives you a protection against death. However, if your main hero is not at risk of dying, then you might want to consider Balance Strike, as this increases the damage you deal from parts of your attack that do not critically strike. Pretty much every damage dealer in the game will benefit from running Balance Strike, and as well the parts that do crit will heal you, so you gain additional survival as well as bonus damage. This is a really important skill to have and massively improves the damage of your heroes. Finally, to maximize burst damage then from your main hero, the other thing you want to consider is your artifact of choice. And for most heroes, the best artifact you can go with is the Melodic Strings, as this gives you 50% all damage dealt right at the start of the fight, and gives you enough energy to have an active skill. An immediate active skill will deal more damage than a basic attack, and with the buff from the Melodic Strings, you will definitely deal a ton of damage. Now, choosing our burst hero, we need to choose someone who is capable of dealing a lot of damage. Some of the best choices available to players would be someone like Lord of Fear Aspen, who is able to deal damage to the whole enemy team if he's able to kill the initial target of his attack. Another great option is Doom Terminator Vulcan, who has a lot of damage that gets increased by his Fearless Arsenal, which gives him additional damage components in his attack. And if you are able to get him to a point where he gets weakness disclosure, he will ignore the defenses of opponents. And another really good option is Mockman. He has chase attacks that are able to deal additional damage to opponents, although I will say there's a lot of RNG or randomness involved when it comes to using Mockman, but he does deal a lot of burst damage, and if you can invest in his attack stat, he can be really, really strong. These are just 3 suggestions. You can pretty much choose any damage dealer hero here, although some will be significantly stronger than others. Another really important thing you want to consider is who your second Transcendence hero is. Take a look at the Tenant list. Remember that we're focusing on making one hero as strong as possible, so finding a Tenant for them that not only buffs their stats, but also gives them good attack as a Tenant in the Celestial Island is really, really important. If we take a look at Aspen, for example, in Tenant Spot 2, Halora is a good hero to use for support, and is also a Tenant. Transcendence Tenants have the highest gains of any Tenant you could possibly give a hero, so whenever a Transcendence hero is good and available, you want to be building them as a Tenant for your hero. As well, you can see in Tenant Spot 4, Aspen can enjoy Elena, and she's another really good support hero. So already that tells us who our first 2 Transcendence heroes should be alongside a Lord of Fear Aspen. If you were going to go take a look at a Doom Terminator Vulcan, however, Tenant Spot 2 is a lot more questionable. This contains Geista. He's another damage dealer, so it seems counterintuitive to have multiple damage dealers on your team because you can only really invest in one. And then there's Eos, who is a bit of an awkward support hero to use early on because her main benefit is from when she has died, she can steal energy from opponents. Yes, she does have Dazzle as a CC, but I don't think her abilities are potent enough to justify. So actually I would rather look across at Tenant Spot 4, where you can see Natalie. She's also a hero that can be used in Light Seal Land alongside your Doom Terminator Vulcan, but more importantly, she gives you shields and increases the damage of the highest attack hero on your team. Well, in that case, that's gonna be your Doom Terminator Vulcan, so Natalie is a really, really strong choice. Once you've found a hero who is a good Tenant to go alongside your main damage dealer, it's now time to think about our third Transcendence hero. And I think for almost every account, the best third Transcendence hero to go with, assuming you haven't already built her as a Tenant, is Halora. The reason is Scarlet Queen Halora gives better bonuses than you would gain from a Tenant. If you look here at Royal Guard, this gives you Queen's Guard that increases the all damage dealt of every hero on your team. And when you improve this, it can reach a maximum of 24% all damage dealt. That is better than the gains you would have for investing in a different hero just because they're a Transcendence tenant. So if you were thinking about building an EOS alongside a Doom Terminator Vulcan just for the tenant stats, it's actually better to go with Scarlet Queen Halora because the all damage dealt you gain here is so much more significant. On top of that, Scarlet Queen Halora can deal Abyssal Corruption to opponents, and this increases the damage of our critical strikes by 24%. So not only are we improving our damage with Royal Guard, we're improving the damage of our crits as well, and this bonus will compound with the Royal Guard and also any holy damage, armor break, and other buffs available to your burst hero. Halora is the best support hero to maximize the damage of a burst strategy, and burst is the best way to get through the early stages of Void campaign because you have a small team, so you need to deal as much damage as possible before that team dies. Therefore, the formula I use when recommending first 3 Transcendence heroes to anybody is choose a main damage dealer, have at least one tenant for that hero, so in the case of a Vulcan, you choose Natalie, and then your third hero should be a Scarlet Queen Halora. Lord of Fear Aspen is therefore very lucky because Elena is a great support, but also he has Halora as a tenant as well. So you're building the Halora because she's good, and she also happens to be a tenant. This is really, really nice for Aspen users. Now, if we're thinking about our 4th Transcendence hero, your team should already have an incredible amount of burst damage. So the one thing you need to cover is opponents you just simply cannot kill with burst. Maybe you're going to be facing a Tix who can steal the attack of your highest attack hero. That can be quite counterproductive. Or maybe you're facing opponents like Holmes Young, who will deal damage whenever the enemy attacks, and it doesn't matter how much damage you do, you just end up dying to Holmes Young's amazingly efficient damage output. Well, one of the best heroes you can use to counter these sorts of heroes is someone called Therapist of Blood, Betty. Betty has the ability Superfluous Ablation, which means the first time in a round that she has more than 100 energy, she will trigger her active skill without consuming that energy. That means it doesn't matter the speed order of the heroes, it will immediately trigger, and the crazy thing about Betty's active skill is it is able to crowd control opponents. Now add to that Betty's core, and you then have the ability to trigger her crowd control effect twice, meaning if the CC didn't trigger on the opponent the first time, it will potentially do so on the second. This means a strategy using Betty with a way that you can get her over 100 energy is going to be extremely efficient for shutting down opponents. This creates a window of opportunity for your burst hero to beat fights they otherwise would not be able to, allowing whether it's an Aspen, a Mockman, a Vulcan, or some other hero to go ahead and damage the opponents once they're struggling under control effects and not able to move. So if you do get to a 4th Transcendence hero, I strongly recommend Betty and make sure you have her core. This is the only core you will need in the early stages of the game. One of the biggest mistakes I see players make is force out cores for their main hero, thinking that they will make that hero to Destiny. This is unwise. Getting Betty's core as the first core you invest in is extremely important, and any other resource or opportunity you have to pick up a core, I would strongly suggest you go for Sublimation instead, as improving the skills of your heroes in the Tree of Origin is extremely more important. Because if you look, a lot of heroes like Vulcan do gain huge benefits when you enhance these skills in the Tree of Origin, and I would rather have that than invest in Vulcan's core. So if you're an early player wondering whether you should be choosing a core for your Vulcan, or maybe it's your Aspen or your Mockman, ask yourself this: why are you choosing core chests? And if you have core chests, use them for Betty. Because getting a core for Betty and being able to use her effectively is super duper important. And you might not have a Betty, that's okay, but at some point you will, so save those chests for later, and for now, focus on investing in Sublimation to improve the skills of the heroes you currently have. What's also really interesting about Betty is to unlock the ability to give her her core, you only need to have Tree of Origin level 1. You don't need the additional Tree of Origin levels that will allow you to improve all her skills. That's not necessary. All you need is that first level, which means she's a very low investment hero. However, if you are going to maximize the performance of a Betty, I strongly encourage you to get an elusive mirror. This starts you with 100 energy, and the way the game mechanic works when you get hit is it gives you energy. So the first time Betty gets hit by a basic attack or active skill, she will gain 10 energy, thus taking her over the 100 and triggering her ability. So a lot of the times, if you're wondering why your Betty is not triggering, it's because she isn't being hit by basic attacks or active skills. So look where the first and fastest opponent is attacking and put Betty in that position. Or if it's someone like a Holmes-Young attacks randomly, so you will need to get lucky and hope that Betty gets hit first. If that happens, her passive will trigger, and all you need then is crowd control to come through, and hopefully her core will trigger and control opponents that didn't get controlled by the initial active. Furthermore then, Elusive Mirror improves our control immunity offset, which is good. One of the most annoying stats that Betty struggles to get past is control immunity. So if you want to improve your Betty further, one thing you can consider is going to the Galactic Tree and taking a look at the Mage Starspawn, the Spirit of Wisdom, as he is able to increase the control immunity offset of your heroes and has a 50% bonus for mages. Betty is a mage, so she benefits from him significantly. Another option can be found in the treasure train. If you go across to Hero Token, you will see there is something called the Lady Sunshine Hat that also offers control immunity offset specifically for mages. So the Starspawn and the hat are very important to making your Betty control as consistently as possible. Another thing to bear in mind is Betty will need to go back to 100 energy after she does her active skill. Therefore, consider having artifacts that can energy feed on your team. I strongly recommend some of the first artifacts you pick up is 2 Demon Bells and Elusive Mirror. That trio of artifacts gives you energy from the Demon Bells, thus topping up heroes that aren't wearing Demon Bells or Elusive Mirrors to 100 energy. And also then the Elusive Mirror is going to feed energy to Betty. One cool thing about Elusive Mirror is it gives heroes 15 energy at the start of the round. If they're wearing Elusive Mirror, that bonus is doubled. Thus, you're able to go ahead and feed Betty energy right at the start of the round, and if that takes her over 100, she will crowd control opponents before anybody has even attacked. Hence why Elusive Mirror is really good on Betty, and then I'd have a couple of Demon Bells on your team as well if you can. After that, if you need more energy feed, I would go back and build another Elusive Mirror, and perhaps even a third one if you need more energy. Remember how we mentioned that using Balance Strike instead of Unbending Will can be a really good idea. But opting for something like Melodic Strings gives you no defense, and you might find that your main damage dealer is dying because they don't have Unbending Will to keep them alive. Sometimes then, using Balance Strike is still the best move, but instead of something like Melodic Strings, you'll need to consider running Golden Crown, as this offers you all damage reduction on your main hero. This increases their chance of surviving and gives them more opportunities to attack. And if you offset the damage you lose from Melodic Strings, the increased number of attacks can actually be more beneficial and increase the chance that you kill the enemy team. So always have a Golden Crown in your back pocket ready to go if you need this artifact. However, I would encourage you to have 2 heroes that are faster than your main damage dealer equipped with Demon Bells, as these will feed energy, still giving you an active skill in round 1, despite the fact you're wearing a Golden Crown. Therefore, the speed of your main damage dealer can be really important, and something quite common you'll see advanced players use is to equip Flame Boots on your hero instead of their class-specific shoes, because the shoes from classes give you a significant speed bonus, and this can be sometimes helpful. However, slowing that hero down to make them slower than your support heroes equipped with Demon Bells can often be extremely important. So make sure you know that this is an option available to you. This is extremely important when trying to maximize the performance of your Scarlet Queen Halora, because Abyssal Corruption is triggered off of her active skill. Therefore, you want your Scarlet Queen Halora to do an active skill before your damage dealer does their attack. This maximizes the damage potential of your hero. So if you're investing in a Scarlet Queen Halora, make sure to increase her tree level so that you can up her overall level and her speed. Also, consider giving her a speed stone to maximize how quickly she can move. Because do remember, heroes that are invested in the Celestial Island don't just get increases to their attack and HP, they also gain speed as well. and overcoming that boosted speed is an extreme challenge, but if you succeed it, you will maximize the damage of your hero. Someone else to consider then is Natalie. If you remember, Natalie buffs the hero with the highest attack, so having her trigger before your main damage dealer is also extremely valuable. So at this point, you have a good idea of your first 4 Transcendence heroes. You need a main damage dealer, you need a Tenant, and you also want to consider having Halora and Betty. At this point, let's consider our next 2 Transcendence heroes. Here, the options become a little more flexible. You now need to ask yourself whether you want to focus more on damage, or maybe there's a specific element of the game that's causing you problems. There might be a wave that's extremely difficult, or a boss you're trying to fight that has some nasty abilities that you want to overcome. This is where knowing the strength of Transcendence support heroes and why we want to build them can be extremely valuable for you. For example, if you want to improve your overall burst damage, Natalie can be valuable. As we said, she buffs the highest attack hero on your team. If you have a Lord of Fear Aspen, you won't have built Natalie at this point. However, Vulcan users will already have her. On the contrary, maybe you're getting hit by control effects, and Elena is really valuable for this as she's able to remove control effects and is even more efficient at it if you improve her passive skill Black in White. However, if you're a Lord of Fear Aspen user, you'll have already built Elena, so maybe this is something for Vulcan users to consider. Another hero that can mess with negative effects is Alakita, one of the newer heroes released to the game. One amazing thing that Alakita is able to do is she can turn debuffs on your team into buffs, so ticks stealing your attack could actually become ticks boosting your attack, and in the case of enemies buffing themselves, Alakita can turn that into a debuff. This makes Alakita extremely strong in certain fights where enemies are throwing negative effects at you, because Alakita flips that back and just makes it much more difficult for the opponent. Definitely a hero worth considering, and I've heard tons of stories of people who have built an Alakita on their account and made some ridiculous progress. And what's fascinating is a hero like Natalie also manipulates negative effects and buffs, increasing the buffs on your team, hurting opponents for having negative effects. And actually, therefore, Natalia and Alakita have incredible synergy. So a lot of Lord of Fear Aspen users now are building Lord of Fear Aspen, Halora, Elena, and then Betty, and then picking their next 2 heroes to be Natalie and Alakita. And this is very strong. However, you might feel that your team needs some more survival. And this is where you need to start considering heroes like Mystic Fairy Freya. Freya has one of the strongest defensive passives in the game, and if you improve it in the Tree of Origin, you can gain 12% all damage reduction for every active skill or basic attack your hero does, and that lasts for 3 rounds. So assuming you're faster than the opponents, you can theoretically be holding up to 36% all damage reduction on your heroes, which makes you extremely resilient against opponents. And this is something that you'll definitely feel in boss fights, such as the Void bosses in the Void Invasion, or something like Star Expedition in deeper levels. Mystic Fairy Freya is still very, very good, despite some people being concerned that her passive skill here was fixed and doesn't give as much attack for the 3rd layer of Evolutionary Factor as it used to. But just take a look at that 1st layer of Evolutionary Factor. It increases all allies' damage reduction by 40%. That is amazing. If she gets that first active skill off, you immediately have a massive damage reduction bonus on your team that can be the difference between winning and losing. And if you consider the longer the fight goes on and the more attacks your heroes can do, they gain even more all damage reduction, so by the time that damage reduction bonus wears off, they already have so much protection. Freya's defense that she grants your team is incredible. Another really good defensive hero to consider if you feel like your team needs more defense is Hyperspace Hunter Ailamak. Ailamak has the passive that when an ally blocks successfully, that ally is granted a shield equal to 600% of the attack of Ailamak. Therefore, you want to make sure that your heroes have a really high block chance, either by giving them block imprints or having a block star spawn, or ideally both. And you also need to have Hyperspace Hunter Ailamak's attack as high as possible, so that the shields he gives your team are able to be big and keep you alive. This is where a lot of people fall short, is they see how strong Ailamak's shields can be, and they try build an Ailamak for themselves, but the one thing they lack is a high attack stat. Therefore, I would only consider building an Ailamak if one of 2 cases was true. Either you have access to a second home in the Celestial Island and can use that to buff up Ailamac's stats, or you have access to another way of improving his stats that doesn't involve the Celestial Island, the most common being the Treasure Train, where you can gain fixed attack bonuses. I would not consider building an Ailamac unless I had like a 3 million fixed attack bonus on my Treasure Train, or I could put him in a house with good tenants. If you can do one of those things, consider building an Ailamac. But don't just jump on him if you can't get his attack stat high, because ultimately he'll be weak and will disappoint you, and you would probably get more mileage out of using a different hero we've already mentioned. Now, one final way to improve the defense of your team is to use a hero like Elena, as she is able to give you dodge, and also if we go back to Freya, she has the ability Mirage Pollen, which gives you a chance to dodge opponents' attacks as well. So consider using Freya with Elena, and you'll give your team a significantly high chance to dodge attacks. The best thing that you can therefore do is invest in support heroes that plug the weaknesses of your team or help you against certain opponents that you're struggling to beat. Ailamac with Elena is extremely useful against the second Void campaign boss, because it's able to crowd control you, and the shields that Ailamac gives are able to keep you alive. This is why you'll see so many people have cleared difficulty 10 in that particular Void invasion boss while struggling against the other ones. However, that's only possible if your Elena has an increased passive 2 in her Tree of Origin, because you want to maximize your ability to remove control effects that opponents can give you. On top of that, you want to make sure that your Ailamac has a really high attack stat. Maybe not as big as my 23 million here, but at least 8 million can be a really good goal to aim for, or even 10 million if you can push to it, because Ailamac needs a good attack stat to give you shields. Either way, the choice here is going to be very personal to you. As long as you have a strong damage dealer, a tenant for that damage dealer, Halora, and Betty, and they are working properly together to give you burst damage and control, you should be able to clear most things in the game. Of course, considering Awakens is another really important thing, as finally, if you are trying to maximize the burst of your hero, consider running something like Giant Killer, as this will increase the damage output of your hero if the enemy has higher HP. And in pretty much every game mode in Idle Heroes, enemies have way more HP than we do. So Giant Killer is pretty much always giving you 100% extra damage, and this scales with everything. Another stat to consider is Defier. I have it here on my Aspen, and if the enemy's HP is above 70%, you deal 30% more damage. And again, that is a 1.3 times modifier that affects all forms of damage that you have access to on that hero. So by having Giant Killer and Defier, you're able to do a lot of damage very quickly to high HP opponents. And yes, Giant Killer affects Defier, meaning that you don't get 30%, but 60% more damage to those opponents. So if you're in the market for an A-tier hero, putting that on your main damage dealer and ensuring that they have at least Giant Killer can be very helpful for making progress, and Defier just adds even more stopping power to that hero. Certain heroes like Mockman and Vulcan also really benefit from skill damage, and do remember, I'll say it again, you want to have a crit damage stat of 150%, so perhaps crit damage is another stat you want to look out for. Things like Armor Break, Holy Damage, and Precision can also be extremely useful, so consider those as well when looking for stats to give to your main damage dealer. Either way, hopefully this video has broken down ideally the first 4 Transcendence heroes you want to build, and given you considerations for the additional 2. I want you guys to feel that you can definitely make informed choices when building your accounts. So whether it's an Aspen, a Vulcan, a Mockman, or some other damage dealer, as long as you follow the formula of making sure you prioritize their burst and build Betty to give you control and have Halora to support you necessarily with a tenant that can also help as well, then you will have a very strong account. Consider Ailamac, Freya, Alakita, or some of the other support heroes that we mentioned today to give you even more damage or defense on your team, or perhaps to overcome a weakness that the enemy is throwing at you, and you will find your team is formidable and makes more progress than people similar to yourself. So after this video now, in the comments section, I encourage you to go and tell me what order of Transcendence heroes you want to be building and the heroes you're interested in adding to your account. There are so many different options and combinations of heroes now, and it's really cool to see all the different creative ideas you guys are coming up with. But if you follow the principles outlined in this video, you will make loads of progress, and I plan on making some videos in the future where I break down this particular way of thinking for different accounts. A Vulcan account, an Aspen account, a Mockman account, and perhaps other accounts as well if you would like to see them, and show you exactly how you can make progress using those different heroes. Either way, guys, if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button. I will see you next time, and as always, have an amazing week, and happy idling.